All right, good evening, everybody. This is the March meeting of the GOC. We're here, and I'm going to put the agenda up, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I know while all our commissioners are getting on, I want to just say that tonight we're going to be covering the review and recommendations of the Community Police Advisory Board Development Task Force. Cami from NACOL is here with us again, and she's going to help myself present and bring forward the first three questions of the mayor's charge, and that will be discussed this evening as time permits, as we're here until 6. So with that, I know that there needs to be approval of the February 24th meeting minutes, and I'll hand it off to y'all.
We can get a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. So we've got Josh, if you want to keep going, we've got three questions that you gave to us earlier in the week to look at. Can you review those real quick and some examples as well as to where we're going with this for today? Did you hear that, Josh? Okay.
You're muted, Josh.
All right. Hopefully y'all can see my PowerPoint and hear me now. We're going to go through the first three questions of the mayor's charge. And let me just get this up on the big screen here. Hopefully y'all can see that now. Everybody see it? All right. So today, as Chair Hamby shared, we're going to cover the first three questions, and you should be able to see those up on the screen now. And so the goal is for the GOC to have conversations around each of these. The first is, what are the community benefits that we seek through creation of an advisory board? And we'll talk about the second and third one as time permits later in the presentation. And as I shared, Cami from NACOL is here again, and she's going to provide context and history on the different frameworks and the different lessons learned from around the country as we move through this presentation. So we're going to tag team this, and we'll do our best to keep it moving. Just real high level, and y'all have seen this before. NACOL provided a presentation in February of 2020 about civilian oversight, and some of the slides from that presentation are kind of also built into this one. They've been tweaked a little bit as there's been some time in between, but civilian oversight, what is it? It's really, investigating and auditing and reviewing law enforcement investigations or processes. It's looking at monitoring law enforcement agencies' policies and procedures. And this last item, it's including any agency or procedure that involves active participation in the above by persons who are not sworn law enforcement. So that's an important delineation to make. There are some communities that have police advisory boards, and in the spreadsheet I sent you all of 30 plus examples yesterday. Some of the examples of cities we compare ourselves to, they have police advisory boards, but in that spreadsheet you'll see that that does not qualify as civilian oversight. So that's a little different, and we're going to talk about civilian oversight. We can also talk about police advisory boards if y'all want later. So this first question, we wanted to pose to the full GOC and for y'all to share, as y'all have done your research, as you have read the recommendation from the task force. Let's just start with how you would answer this question. What are the community benefits that we seek through creation of an advisory board?
I'll start with that community advice or oversight, you get more confidence in local law enforcement from the general population, which means, folks are more likely to call law enforcement when they actually need them rather than avoiding them and ending up in a dangerous situation.
I believe you get more transparency. And just to piggyback off of Commissioner Link, that people have more trust in the police and feel more integrated, or people will get a better sense. Hopefully, people will have a better sense of community within our police department.
Yeah, I'll jump in and definitely agree with both Commissioner Lake and Davenport on that. I had trust, just trust in our police force, trust in our community more so. I think that trust can maybe go both directions. Transparency, better community engagement, a diversity of ideas and perspectives to be brought to our police department. And I guess building on that trust and confidence, legitimacy in the work of the police.
I think also it can ensure that the officers that do seek to be a part of a force that has that citizen oversight, are officers that are in line with the values of that community.
Those are all good points. Can y'all hear me now, or not?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll just add to that it does. I think it's helpful in the fact that as we look to continue and improve upon community-oriented policing, it's helpful for police to hear from citizens, a citizen advisory board about what their neighborhood may be facing and what help is needed, and vice versa. The police could use the advisory board to also be a assistance in doing their jobs.
I don't know if it's appropriate for me to jump in, but if I can, I'd like to add a couple of quick things.
Sure, Chief, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think everything that everybody's presented so far is excellent. I think that the one word that I would add is understanding, and that's understanding both from the police department and from the community, an understanding of what the expectation from the police department's perspective, what the expectations and the desires of the community are from the police department, and then from the community an understanding of what the laws are, what the rules are, and why we take the actions and do the things that we do. Just that whole communication piece and helping to increase dialogue will help increase understanding.
Okay, good. Anybody else have any other questions on that one? All right, Josh, if you want to move along to number 2, I think we've got some good understanding on this one.
Yeah, so we want to just kind of affirm kind of what we heard here. So in terms of question 1, these are many of the reasons why communities across the nation think about oversight. And so I just want to make sure that you all mentioned many of the things here. Public confidence and trust, building bridges, accountability, effective policing. So the reasons y'all mentioned are very similar to what we're seeing around the country. With that, I wanted to just hand it off to Cammie for 2 slides of kind of contextually what NACOL was seeing around the country, and these are some things that they shared with the task force. So Cammie, I'm going to hand it off to you for these next 2 slides.
Thank you. So yeah, the next 2 slides are really talking about 2 very important components of civilian oversight. There's a reactive component and a proactive component. So just to explain that a little bit more, reactive really is talking about there's always going to be that incident where the community feels that they need an avenue to address whether it's misconduct or issue or misunderstanding with the police. And so you need an element of civilian oversight that can be there when almost waiting for that moment where they need to address an issue that the community has with local law enforcement. The proactive nature of civilian oversight is more looking at how can we look at current practices or maybe systemic issues to make some changes so that we can make civilian oversight a little bit better, law enforcement a little bit better and meet the demands of the community. Josh, you mind going back to the other slide? I'm sorry. Thank you. So when we're talking about reactive, it's really important to remember that you need to have a process where your community feels very comfortable and safe accessing the complaint process. That can look like allowing anonymous complaints for those who are very afraid to make a complaint, making sure that they can make complaints without fear of any retaliation, that where they can go and make complaints is accessible and easy, whether that's online for those who might be working during a normal 9 to 5 day. Also, it's building trust through the reviewing investigations to make sure they're done in a fair and proper manner. And also, if it's done in an effective manner and also a sustainable manner, public confidence can improve with police. Kind of talking about some of the reasons of the why. If that's important, civilian oversight can provide that conduit for improving trust and confidence. And then the importance of transparency cannot be overstated. Law enforcement to most of the community is traditionally a very opaque process. And so offering some transparency into that process not only helps the community feel more comfortable, but it also does help to begin building that bridge between police and community when they have a better understanding. Next slide, Josh. Thank you. So next, a little bit more of the proactive elements. So there's a great opportunity to actively help improve policing in a community. The theory is that if there's a consistent and transparent process, it'll deter officers from engaging in misconduct. Also, I think it's important to note that it also provides a way for officers to feel that the process is fair internally as well if they have an external review happening. We've seen that in several instances across the country where officers are saying that it does help them feel better about the process, that they're being treated more fairly, whether it comes to discipline or the investigation itself. Also, some things to think about, cities often pay a lot out in liability or in legal liability lawsuits brought about because of officer actions. And so civilian oversight can help be a piece of that process that helps to lessen such lawsuits. And then also, actually going back to what Chief Spruill said earlier, if the public better understands policy and procedures, they often have a better understanding of why police do what they do at times. And this assists in the trust building process. That is a very active part of civilian oversight.
All right, and then one thing we just wanted to make sure to bring up when we talk about proactive, and this is just something for the GOC to think about. It's out there. It's coming. The Safety and Justice Committee. The mayor has created this committee, and it will be getting started in the coming weeks, and we'll be having their first meeting probably, hopefully in the next month. Not exactly the same thing, but related and in the same realm of policing, more focused on the broad, proactive safety and justice, before something gets to the police department. But this is really something to think about is there any connection between the Safety and Justice Committee and this conversation? So just wanted to throw it out there. A lot of words in this slide, but we'll send out the slide deck. Just wanted y'all to keep that in the back of your brains as well as we go through this. All right, so this is the question. If there's no other feedback at this point, we'll keep going, but I wanted to give you all one more chance if you wanted to share anything else about question 1.
And Josh, I wanted to see also if any committee members have any questions for Cammie or Chief Spruill. If everybody heard me there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. All right, Josh, good. Let's move along to the next topic here.
Yep, and before we do, we just wanted to kind of point back to the task force community benefits identified by the task force in their recommendations. So this is from the first and second pages, but we've summarized what the task force, how they answered this first question: trust, accountability, positive police community relations, enhancing change, creating bridges, fair and impartial ends. So we just wanted to make sure to point back to that as well and show some of the common themes we're hearing right now.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We're going to move to the second half of this presentation. So as we heard the recommendation last month, we thought it would be really helpful in order to answer the second and third question posed by the mayor, to really get into each of the individual models one at a time. And so we wanted y'all as a committee to think about how each individual model would help answer the second and third question. So we're going to go through the questions as we go through the different models. And so y'all can think about the pros and the cons of one model over the other in really answering the second and third question. And what this will do is make sure we're all on the same page about the different models of civilian oversight. So I'll give you all a second. I'll just read these questions out loud once, and I won't read them again, I promise. But the second question is, how can an advisory board provide front-end guidance to ensure positive police community relations through policy, process, budget, review, and input? And we're not going to ask you to answer these yet. We're going to go through one model first, and then we'll ask you to share your thoughts on these two questions. The third question is, how can an advisory board provide effective response to specific challenging or controversial episodes? Right. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Cammie, and she's going to talk about the review-focused model.
Thanks, Josh. So the review-focused model is typically what we think of when we're talking about boards and commissions. So it ensures the community has input in the process. That's one of the biggest benefits that we see with a review-focused oversight model. Individuals are most commonly appointed to the review board or commission by the mayor, city council. It's different in cities depending on how their city structure actually works. And in some instances, much like we see in the task force recommendations, there are some allotted spots of who sits on that commission, whether that's certain segments of the community, certain community groups. In some cities, even we see very specifically named organizations that have a seat on the board. Appointment structures often ensure that there's a broad cross-section of the community and that various perspectives and forms of knowledge are included in the feedback that's then eventually given to the department on the cases that they review. It's also really important to note that boards and commissions are often assisted by professional staff who carry out all of the administrative and clerical functions. They're normally not just out there. There are a few, but they have, with a volunteer board, it often becomes very difficult for them to handle those administrative tasks as well as the mandate that they're given. The strengths of the review focus, no, you can go ahead, thanks. The strengths, it does provide a high level of transparency, and as I mentioned before, it really gives that piece of involvement by the community that the community then starts to feel more comfortable with the process and with law enforcement. And police departments are more likely to take action on recommendations that are made publicly. It brings transparency to the process. And the thing about transparency is when everything's out in the open, people tend to start doing something about things. There are some challenges actually to all of the models. Review-focused models, solely review-focused models, tend to lack independence. Really, they're very much review, some make recommendations. Very rarely are they able to have any actual authority in implementing anything, but they do often have that authority to make policy recommendations or recommendations if they don't agree with the disposition of an investigation, things like that. A challenge is that it's also an all-volunteer mechanism, and there's, depending on the volume of cases, it could be burdensome to them. Time commitment of the board members. If you're trying to get a cross-section of a community, you also need to consider that there are people who might be working more than one job, might have childcare issues or elder care issues, things like that. Trying to take all of that into consideration so that you can meet all of the needs. And also, you also need to really focus on training because you're bringing together members of the community who might not know a whole lot about law enforcement or the policies that guide them. And so it's important that they're given that training up front so that they have that information to do the best job they can. Some examples of this, if we want to look in the Southeast, Charlottesville Police Civilian Review Board, it's a fairly new entity, and they have a review board. They are, I will say, Virginia has passed a state law that has now mandated certain authorities for all of their review mechanisms or oversight mechanisms. And so they are in the process of revamping that to gain more authority. There's also the Durham Civilian Police Review Board. And I believe all of these are in the document that Josh mentioned earlier, the spreadsheet, so the specifics and more information, so I won't go too deep into all of it. Knoxville Police Advisory Review Committee, so they are a little bit of both the advisory and the oversight piece of this. They do work very closely with the chief to provide input into the process, but they also review internal affairs investigations. And then we also have this Syracuse Citizen Review Board in New York, who is a very traditional model of and is also a city very similar in size to yours.
So the to Cammie's point, these are all in the spreadsheet of examples except for Syracuse, but we will add that and we can resend it out as we continue to add communities. I think the important thing for y'all to do with that spreadsheet is know that we're going to continue adding information for each of these communities as we reach out to them. But the websites are really helpful to go visit. So as you've heard about kind of what a review focus model is, it's actually on the spreadsheet. It's probably the most common. Go and see the variety of review focus models by clicking on the websites and just getting a feel for the work and how they're set up. I think that'll be very helpful for each of you. All right, so with the review focus model in mind, how do you all think about the second and third question? What would you like to share?
I have a question real quick. And it's for Cammie.
Yes.
Can you go back to the previous slide? Charlottesville, West Virginia, you said that the state is, can you explain this, what this West Virginia is doing to what happened with Charlottesville Police Civilian Review Board concerning the state?
Okay, so the state of Virginia, over this late summer, passed a law that mandated certain levels of authorities be given to civilian oversight entities. So originally, they really were not able to do very much in the state of Virginia. They had quite a few advisory panels. Very few had the ability, although Charlottesville was an exception, had the ability to review internal affairs investigations or have any access to any documents, really. So and I'm happy to provide to Josh to send out to all of you a link to that state law that kind of outlines those authorities. So what's happening is you have cities like Charlottesville, Richmond, Alexandria are all looking at their existing mechanisms, whether they were oversight boards or they were advisory boards, and are now in the process of revamping them to meet those minimum standards, if not more.
Thank you. And sorry for saying West Virginia, but thank you.
Sorry.
The advisory, the review focus model is, I guess I'm hearing it also, you could also call it an advisory focus model, maybe? Is that right? Or is that something?
So there is a difference between an advisory and a civilian oversight mechanism. So advisory normally is not embedded in any kind of a law or executive order. it is often one that really just advises or gives input normally to the police department.
Right.
It's rarely doesn't really has any independent authority.
I guess
So it's really just someone that meets with the chief. I actually sat on one here for the sheriff's department for some time, and it was really a meeting to just talk about issues in the sheriff's department.
right. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, you know, as we go through the models, we have, you know, we have many boards and authorities here in Athens, and most of them make recommendations to the mayor and commissioner, or to most of them to the mayor and commission for policy changes. So I'm just trying to figure out, for consistency's sakes, how something we develop might fit in with what we're already doing for ease of purpose. But I don't know. I guess maybe if we, Josh, maybe if we hear about more of the models, perhaps we could better answer your two questions there.
Yeah, we can go all through the models before we ask the questions if you want.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay. Just one thing to add to Cammie's response, Chair. I would say that in terms of the review model, you know, I'm not an expert, but as I've kind of pulled together the different examples in the spreadsheet and talked with Cammie, the review model in some cases seems, you know, a complaint will be made to the police department. The police department will look into it, and if the complainant's not happy with it, it could then go before the review focused civilian oversight board. And Cammie, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, that's kind of how Durham works. But each of these models, and you'll see this on the spreadsheet, it will be a review focused model, but there's really no same way of doing it within that model. So there could be 10 review focused models on that spreadsheet, but if you click into them, you'll see they're each a little different. And so, yeah, it's that general theme that's important. So with that, we'll keep moving, unless Cammie, I spoke out of something up there.
No, that's right. But you didn't speak out of turn at all. So but I will add to that's a really important point. So even if you were to take 200 oversight entities, you'd be hard pressed to find two that were identical, because it's really important that they've all kind of molded to meet the needs of the community. So there might be that bits and pieces of a model that the community might not need, but others that it desperately does. So that's what causes those differences.
All right, and with that, we're on to the investigation focus model.
Okay, so the investigative focus model is really, it's taking the misconduct investigations and doing them externally from the police department. So investigative models tend to be very good at reducing bias in investigations or perceived bias, particularly from the viewpoint of the community. It's very important that they have full-time trained civilian investigators. And most of them are required to have a certain amount of training. And I will say a lot of the investigators in those types of agencies come from a private investigator or even a former law enforcement background. Investigations are conducted by the agency. They don't rely on any investigators from internal to the department. And these are really great, like I said before, increasing community trust. Next slide. Thanks. So trust, as I said before, is one of the main strengths, tends to avoid conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest, and it's independent of police internal affairs. I will say there are a couple of entities out there. You'll normally find it in much larger cities where they have replaced internal affairs with a civilian internal affairs, a civilian head of internal affairs. Seattle is an example of that, the Office of Professional Accountability. Although there are some definite challenges to this model. First of all, it's expensive because you've got to pay for a staff that can do the investigations. You've got to pay for highly trained staff. Police departments, I'll just be honest, they don't like this in this model because they like the fact that they have control over the investigation. They want to do it internally. Another challenge is that that having access to the records, the internal records, can sometimes be a challenge. And in many jurisdictions, you run into a problem with the police unions and the Officers' Bill of Rights not allowing this type of investigation, independent investigation, to occur. And so some examples of this. Now, I will say, as I'm going through these examples, and we'll talk about this a little later when we get to the hybrid models, some of these, actually all three of these have a review board mechanism to them, but they're primarily investigation focused. In fact, I can't think of an investigation focused model in the country that doesn't have a review board attached to it. So because they want to have that community involvement, and they also help to oversee if someone else is doing the investigation, don't they need to be overseen as well? So then there's the review board to help in that process, and the review board also is so important in that community outreach piece as well. So some examples are Atlanta, also the Miami Civilian Investigative Panel, and then also a city that's similar in size, Providence, Rhode Island, also has their external review authority. And I think that one is on the list as well on the spreadsheet. And they do investigations.
And this one, the reason we brought Providence in as an example is it was, it's hard to find a smaller community in our size range that is doing this. Mm-hmm. I think, just guessing, likely due to the cost. I don't know if there's any other reasons, Cammie.
A lot of it has to do with cost, and also in smaller cities, I think there's sometimes a difficulty in saying, if we have X number of complaints a year, can we justify the cost or the additional staff to do this? I will say that there are some entities out there who, somewhere in the process, they can, if they feel an investigation hasn't been done appropriately, that they have the authority to initiate an external investigation. And they have where they can hire an independent investigation to be done. So they don't necessarily have to have the staff on hand. They can hire someone in the long run or outside if necessary.
I have a question about this model. You said in Seattle that this kind of independent investigation and review board body has replaced the internal investigation wing of the police department. And do you have any indication of how that has offset the cost of the police department's budget?
I don't know that offhand, but I am guessing they do. So I can actually absolutely reach out to them and see if they could give me that number. And what they've done is it is civilian. And there are some civilian investigators, but then there are also some sworn law enforcement who are in there working with them as well. Uh-huh. But they probably, I think it's like a 60-40 split.
How long has Seattle had this model? Is it fairly recent?
No, they've had that component of their model since, well, really for as long as I can remember, so probably at least 15, 20 years.
And has there been, is there any data on how how have complaints gone up or down, or, how has it impacted the actual policing itself?
I think that there has been some improved confidence in the process. I don't know specific numbers if they've gone up or down. Seattle is, it's a different beast. I mean, they have a lot of complaints, and last summer has skewed all numbers in many larger cities because of the number of complaints that came out of the summer protests.
Cammie,
but I can still ask them for some data and see what I can get from them for you for sure.
Cammie, can you talk to the issue of and help us understand the difference between a criminal investigation versus an administrative investigation, and how these boards would, how this independent group would work on either one of those? With us, when we have a police involved shooting, we turn that over to the GBI. And so that would be an independent investigation. That wouldn't be something that they would be involved in here. But how does that work, criminal versus administrative, with this type of investigative model?
So I can tell you, tell you that there is there will be an attorney, a city attorney probably appointed to any board, whether it's yours or one that already exists, that helps them make determinations of the fact that when a complaint comes in, it needs to be triaged. If it is of a criminal nature, potentially, there tends to be a pause put on anything that the civilian review board would do, because they don't want to necessarily do anything that would hurt a criminal case. And so a lot of times what happens is, if there is a criminal proceeding, the civilian oversight, review, investigation, whatever, pauses until that is done.
Right. So what I was getting at, Commissioner Links mentioned, whether you'd be able to do away with the police or eliminate some of the police resources, but the police would hang, and my experience with these type boards would be that the police would hang on to the criminal investigative matter. So the number of cases that the investigative group would be looking at is very limited.
And I have a follow-up question too, regarding complaints. You'd mentioned, and Commissioner Link and Chief brought this up. So if you could, and last year's numbers may be skewed, but typically how many complaints would the Atlanta Citizen Review Board look into versus Providence Board? And Chief, maybe you can tell us how many complaints we've had here in Athens-Clarke County. I think that might be helpful.
Sure, I'm pulling the information up right now. If you give me just 1 second.
Tammy, do you have any idea about Atlanta versus Providence?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can I can tell you that Atlanta is going to have more than Providence. I mean, right. Yeah. Most communities, if you look at Providence, it'll probably be fairly similar to what you see in your size city. It tends to be.
I'm just trying to get a sense of what a big city would be versus a smaller size city like this.
So. The one piece, and this is what we can look into, Commissioner Hamby, for more information with Cammie's help. But for example, Atlanta, I think just looking at their website, has 9 staff on board. Mm-hmm. So they've got 9 staff that are doing this work. So that would speak to probably the number of complaints they have. But we can look into the details for sure.
Okay. How many staff do we have in the internal investigation department in our own police department?
Yeah, we have 2. We have a lieutenant and a sergeant that are assigned to our professional standards division. And just to give you an idea, you asked about the number of complaints. In 2019, in 2019, we had a total of 64 complaints, and that included complaints that came from within the police department and ones that came from outside of the complete police department. So if somebody missed court or backed into a pole or something like that, and we initiated an investigation, that included 19 policy infractions, 4 that were related to criminal violations, and 3 that were related to excessive force. Now, the information is available at our transparency site, and it gives you a breakdown of how many were sustained and how many were unfounded and things like that. And you can get way into more details, and I can certainly provide more information. But I think this goes back to, I think Commissioner Links mentioned, do we have enough complaints coming in per year? Maybe it was Cammie that to warrant an individual who's doing only these investigations. And with the 64 total complaints last year, I don't know what folks' thoughts would be on that.
Well, Josh, if we want to, I'm trying to be mindful of the time. So if we want to go through these next 2 examples, and we can continue talking.
Great. And as I switch slides, we have looked up Seattle. It looked like in 2019 they had 928 complaints, but there is an evaluation or an annual report they put out. So we can send that out to the GOC, and that might answer a lot of y'all's questions about Seattle. All right. I'll hand it back to Cammie.
So the next one is the Auditor Monitor Focus Model, which is like the review board, a component of what the task force has recommended. Really, this emerged a political compromise between community and law enforcement. It has more robust reporting practices, which brings that transparency element back in. And what a lot of people really gravitate towards in this model is that it has the ability to produce long-term systemic changes. Through the auditing or monitoring process, they're able to look and see patterns and trends of things that might need to be addressed. And some of those things are, for instance, you see someone who, a series of complaints, all the same kind of misconduct. Once you look into it, you see, oh, these people all have very similar or close together badge numbers, which means more than likely they were part of the same training academy. Going back, you realize, well, there was someone that was from outside of our department where chokeholds were allowed, even though we don't allow them, and they trained them that they could do them. So it's just a matter of retraining. And having someone who's doing this kind of random audits or focused audits allows you to see those types of issues and address them. It also allows the agency to actively be engaged in all of the steps of the complaint process. They can often monitor investigations that are happening. It just makes sure that things are happening. You see things more thoroughly throughout the process rather than just at the very beginning and the very end. It identifies issues, whether it's with complaints, investigations, police training, policies, supervision. Has the ability to garner community trust. It does have challenges just like the rest of them. It often relies on law enforcement agency to provide accurate data. It does, identifying patterns and trends does require someone who is willing to do the detailed work and the extensive data collection and analysis. And you also have, there's always the problem, your information or your data or your report is only as good as the data you're given. So you have to make sure that sometimes things might be a little flawed because groups, there may be underreporting of certain things, particularly if you're talking about marginalized groups. So those are all things to consider. All of those are not insurmountable challenges, but definitely things that have to be considered in the process. And some examples, New Orleans in the Southeast is strictly a monitor. They don't have a civilian review board attached. But I also wanted to bring forward the Spokane Office of the Police Ombudsman and the Eugene Office of the Police Auditor are both similar sized cities to yours, and they both have an auditor monitor focused model. That also has a review board attached as well. That focuses very much on reviewing the work of the auditor or monitor and doing a lot of community outreach work. Lastly, we have the hybrid models. And so I have to be honest, there are very few oversight agencies out there at this point that aren't hybrid to some extent, particularly those that are now coming online. They contain one or two or more of the focus models that we already discussed. They are developed in that way to address specific needs in the community. And as I mentioned, they're very, very common, particularly newly emergent civilian oversight models.
And one thing that Cami shared the other day that I thought was helpful, just from my understanding, is I think you said that as of June 2020, there was about 200 civilian oversight agencies out there, and since June 2020, you've seen additional, approximately 130. We've been coming on board. So this is, to some degree, one of the reasons might be seen model, no same place is the exact same, is because this is fairly new and there's new things, new communities coming on board, and new practices coming on board. Next slide. Sorry, Cami.
That's okay. Some examples of hybrids. And so I wanted to give you a couple that were somewhat similar in size, particularly Madison. These are new agencies, and they are, the Civilian Review and Accountability Board. I mean, they have just seated their board, actually Madison too. They don't have, they have some city staff helping them, but both Louisville and Madison are in charge of hiring the counterparts. So Louisville will be part of the process in hiring the Inspector General, but Madison is, their review board is completely responsible for hiring the independent monitor. So they're both in that process as well. So they're very different models than what the task force has recommended, but they're also additional examples of what can be done in cities that are of similar size.
And I think they're both so new. I think Louisville is actually so new. We just I gave you a link to a news article about it. So they might not even have a website yet. So these are both fairly new, and would encourage you all to look at them as part of that spreadsheet. So here are the two questions, and I'll turn it over to you, Chair. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Okay. You think Cammie, thank you very much. You've given us a lot to think about with these examples, and certainly we want to make sure that whatever we do here in Athens is effective, and like we all answered in that first question, all of those goals for that first question. So I guess we do have a lot of information before us, a lot to think about. Do any committee members have? I'm trying to look for direction about what we do next. How do we move forward here, and what we're coming up on the hour time. So I personally feel like I've got a lot to look at and a lot more to read about these other communities. Maybe even before I can answer some of these important questions here, but y'all may think otherwise. So if anybody has a comment, Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, we've been presented these different models, and we have a task force that's done a lot of work and made recommendations on these models. So, I mean, I think it's worth this board considering which of these models are we starting to favor. I mean, I don't know if we want to ask that question right now, but moving forward, I'm curious as to how the GBI investigations would fit into some of these things, because quite frankly, I think some of this lack of confidence might be coming out of a lack of confidence in the state agency investigations. So I don't know if anybody has any insight into that, how you run these parallel investigations while there's also state level investigations, and what happens when those conflict.
Chief, do you have anything?
Very quickly, I would say if it is a criminal investigation, I don't believe it would fall under the purview of this independent board. If it's a criminal investigation, the district attorney and the Georgia Bureau of Investigations would handle it separate and apart from what we're trying to do here.
Okay. Commissioner Denson, do you have anything, or Commissioner Davenport?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I had kind of gone through these questions a little bit that are on the screen. Just thinking, I guess, kind of thinking backwards again of what we would want on the front end, and also what we'd want on the back end, the after fact of these controversial episodes, as it's worded in this and question 3. So just worth thinking backwards that we can ensure that we pick a model that does the things that we think that an advisory board or whatever it's going to be called does. So for question number 2, for what they could be doing on the front end to, again, build that trust, that transparency, that community engagement. I was thinking regular reviews of policy, procedure, and budgets, and having those recommendations go not just to the mayor and commission, but also to the manager's office, also the ACCPD, to have community engagement events, and also create new portals for community engagement, so that we are receiving feedback and assessments and ideas that maybe wouldn't be as honestly presented directly to police. Identifying potential issues and improvements, before they come up, And also, I think that on the front end, it could really be ensuring that our policing, our style of policing and the policies and everything is in line with the overall community expectations, but also the community priorities, and a lot of the priorities that the commission sets, that we kind of go through in our goals and objectives and everything too, to make sure that that policing is actually in line with those things. So I think that's some of the things that can be done on the front end. And on the back end, I just had three things. I think it'll add legitimacy to investigations when there is a controversial episode. I think something that we've all seen is that no matter how thorough the investigation is, and if video is connected to or whatever it is, there's still a portion of the community that looks at it very critically. And I think that if we had also some independent review happening, it would add more legitimacy, especially as what we've heard that often, more than not, the findings are the same, but yet the trust in the community is not the same of that investigation. And quickly, I think it's a way for public to have a better understanding of the controversial episode that happened. And then possibly most importantly, having this advisory board looking at these specific challenging, controversial episodes, I think gives us a look at that episode from a very different perspective than what an internal investigation can do. And I think, again, that speaks to that trust and that transparency and that community engagement. And there's the last thing I wanted to say is, as we go through and talk about this, we obviously trust and legitimacy, I think, are some of the biggest things we have here. And not only is it about trust and legitimacy in the police department, but we have to have trust and legitimacy in the process of choosing whatever oversight we have here. And so I think that if we don't, and I think we are, I'm saying we have to be careful that we don't somehow disrespect or throw out the window the recommendations from the community task force, because if we do, we undercut that legitimacy and the trust, and we kind of undercut this whole process in general. I'm kind of with Commissioner Link. I like the recommendations, and I'd be interested for us to start talking about if those recommendations fit those goals we're talking about, and if not, which models do.
Mr. Davenport?
Josh Edwards, can you go back to the, okay, right there. So I like some of the recommendations of what the advisory committee has done. Great work, but I'm still stuck on question number 3, because if most of the hot button issues are criminal investigations, and as Chief Brewer has stated, if most of the hot button issues that we have in our community are criminal investigation, and that the advisory committee, or this auditor monitor, will not have the purview of that information for like legal issues and stuff like that. I would just like to learn or know more how to integrate that, or some of the obstacles and some of the issues concerning that.
And I know we're running short on time, but there is a place where even those kind of investigations, after the criminal investigation is completed, would come back for an administrative review. And so there would be an opportunity for that board to look at, say even a police involved shooting, but it wouldn't occur until after the criminal investigation has been completed.
Okay.
But generally when when that happens, the investigation is completed. So this review body they essentially would bring up more questions, correct? So will that restart the process?
So what happens is, and very quickly, what happens is, I'm just going to take a police involved shooting, for example. Police involved shooting occurs, it's looked at as any other criminal investigation would be looked at. Because we want an independent body to handle that investigation, we would turn it over to GBI. GBI would do their investigation, and they would turn it over to the district attorney, and the district attorney would decide whether they want to place charges against whoever. Once they've completed their investigation, we would do an administrative investigation to look at whether any policies were violated, whether there's an equipment need, whether there is any need for us to change or do anything differently. that is where I think we would then, that administrative investigation, the board, the review board would then look at what our investigation and decide whether they agree with it, whether they disagree with it, whether they want to make recommendations for different training, changes to policy, more equipment, et cetera. So there's a process, but what I was trying to point out is that the criminal process is always going to take precedent and go before anything else.
Okay, I think Sherry has a comment.
Thanks. And again, I know we're out of time. I just want to briefly point out that one of the things that Judd and I have talked about extensively, and maybe Cami could speak to this for another day, is that when we talk about the criminal investigation being over, the police typically think about when they close their case and hand it off to the DA, and that's over, or in the context of like an internal investigation when that is over. But when we talk about open records, the legal definition of over is actually after, not only after the trial, but after direct appeals have been done, which is often many, many years. And so the concern there is that you may have cases that this board is going to want to look at, and the DA's office is saying under no circumstances are they allowed to see that information, because if they see it, if they get copies of it, then that voids any confidentiality, and it would have to be released if someone made open records requests to that. So there's some really significant concerns about how anybody would review documents that might have the potential to affect a pending criminal investigation.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you. That was the response I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, before I make a suggestion about some next steps in our next meeting, is Commissioner Edwards, I don't want to leave you out if you had something you wanted to say, but if not, that's fine too.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I too have read through, and the hybrid model seems to be a palatable compromise of all the different proposals out there, where you have an auditor who has no investigative powers but merely observes the progress of an internal investigation, and then the board would have sort of a broad mandate to provide recommendations and communication back and forth from the police to the governing authority. So I feel pretty comfortable moving forward with this sort of hybrid auditor model based on what I've heard thus far. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, so maybe I would think that during the next month, we'll take some time to look at some of the examples that Josh and Cami have sent to us, and we'll come back and we'll continue this discussion about the models, because I think everybody's made some good points here tonight, and certainly Sherry and Cami and Chief have as well. So maybe if we take a look at the models, the examples of the models, and maybe we could ask our attorney here, Sherry Hines, would you be able to weigh in on some sort of, like Commissioner Davenport was concerned about some of the legal questions, maybe for our community, there might be some legal things that need to be addressed with some of the models that have been presented to us from that standpoint. And also maybe as y'all are thinking about the models and the hybrid approach, maybe there's a staged approach that we could take and build upon that. I know Commissioner Denson was talking about front end versus back end, and how a staged approach might get us started and go from there. So does that sound good to everybody, or am I heading us in the wrong direction? I would like to know, my personal goal, I don't know, y'all may have something different, but I'd like to have this discussion wrapped up by budget time, so that in case there is some budget implications that we have it available for the full commission to decide on. So just to give you a time frame about what I'm looking at. Does that sound good with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks like Commissioner Davenport's having trouble hearing, maybe. And I was just going to say very quickly, I'm happy to respond. It sounds like from your question, you just like me to provide a memo of some of the potential legal concerns. Is that what I'm hearing? I just want to make sure I understand you.
I think so. I mean,
okay.
what you think. Yeah, maybe some thoughts on, from the attorney's viewpoint, about might work best here in Athens based on our charter, our local laws, and any state laws that may be applicable.
Okay, I will do that.
Okay. Josh, you still there?
Yes, sir. And we'll work on adding a couple of the communities. I think we had most of them on the list. There was one or two we'll add, and we'll send it back out to y'all. But you have enough to get started in terms of the examples, and we'll also keep collecting. You'll see in the columns further to the right, where it talks about staffing and appointment and some of the more structural differences between the communities. We'll work on filling in those TBDs as well. So. But I think y'all got enough information to get started, and let us know what else you need.
Okay. Cammie, once again, thank you for your time. Chief, thank you for yours as well. Very much appreciated, and what you're doing.
I have one question really quick, Josh, request.
Sure.
Just to try to get as much as we can on the Spokane and the Madison, which were similar size to us, and also at least some similarities to the recommendation. I don't think those were on the spreadsheet. And I know they're so new, but if we could get any new info on those, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I got the spreadsheet. I think Spokane's in there. And I know we added Madison, but I'll go back and double check. But we might be able to just pull more information about those and send them to you too. But yeah, we'll get you whatever you need. I see Spokane in there. And let me just make sure. And Madison's there too. But if there's anything else, I'm sure Cammie can pull even more information about specific communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Cammie. If there's a motion to adjourn, we'll go ahead and do that, y'all.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Good
everybody.
night, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.